Hi, welcome. My name is Shalane McLaughlin. I'm joining you at Optima here from sunny Sarasota, Florida. This hour, we're going to give you some fun, interactive, and hopefully surprising ways to address the most common and safety and alignment concerns that I see during exercise. Whether this is for a group of 500, your small group, or a one-on-one client training, I hope that there'll be something here for you. Here's a sneak peek of some of the top 8 safety concerns that I see. So just hang on and we will address them. For a more interactive experience and for answering your questions live, please click on the QR code with your camera, your phone camera, and open the corresponding webpage. I'll provide my contact info at the end for my handouts, and also Optima does provide handouts as well. As I said, I am Shalane McLaughlin, and I am so blessed to be here and a master instructor for AFA to speak at fitness conferences and hold AFA master workshops for the group fitness instructor program around the country. So prior to fitness, I was 14 years on a trading floor, and then I spent about over a decade in teaching, being a fit pro. So gym floor to trading floor to gym floor, and I haven't looked back. Prior to all this craziness, I taught 8 to 10 to sometimes 16 classes per week in a variety of formats. Currently, I teach 7 virtual classes a week, mostly for seniors, as I live in Florida, and I recently started a fitness blog. So to help with navigation, just to let you know, the top blue, dark blue tab is the topic that we're discussing, and the bottom right is the corresponding page number to the handouts. I want to let you know that, love it or hate it, social media is a marketing and connection tool. So please post. It'll help your credibility with your clients to let them know that you're actively investing in knowledge to help them. Post about something new that you've learned, changes that you're going to bring to class. It's a really organic way for you to interact and show vulnerability to your students. Here are some hashtags that you can use, and also for this event, it is Optima Online. So please make sure you tag NASM and AFA, and you never know, our active social media group might repost your post. All right, back to coaching cues. Why do we coach? All right, let's see. Raise your right hand. Okay, now everybody raise your right hand and keep it raised. Put it down. Now raise your right hand. Was that much, much faster? It was, because our brain, through the central nervous system, our CNS, directs our muscles to move. So our brain creates synapses or connections to help us form patterns, and that speeds up our reaction time. So over time, it can become a muscle memory. The first time that we do it, it took us much, much longer than the second time because our brain already created a shortcut. All right, it's time to play a game. So hopefully for this purpose of this session, I'm going to refer to class as a group of fitness class or a small group or personal training session, and participant for student, attendee, or client, instructor for you, the group fitness instructor, personal trainer, or coach. So if you want to play along, click on the, use your phone. Otherwise, 10 fingers up and put 1 finger down if it's true. Ready? Here we go. Oops, sorry. As an instructor, do we attend fitness conferences? Everybody should have got that one. Teach group fitness classes. Have eye contact with at least 3 participants in your class, every single class. Do you give cues by pointing for a direction? Do you verbally cue for safety? Do you smile in every class or session? Do you know more than 20% of your participants' names? So hopefully you know more than a quarter. Do you give an intro before class with your name, class format, and goal for the day? Do you give an outro where you thank participants and tell them when your next class is? And finally, do you have a fitness certification, such as the AFA Group Fitness Instructor or the NASM CPT? All right, now, if you have more than 6, you are doing great. And if you have all 10, you're an amazing instructor, and I hope I can give you some more tools for your toolbox. All right, so our agenda today is pretty quick. It's going to be cueing. We're going to talk about what is cueing, what is coaching, the definitions, the differences, the overlaps. And then that brings us to what I like to call coaching cues, which is kind of a next level cues to ensure participant safety and success. Now, my top 8 coaching cues are we're going to discuss all of those. And then we're going to talk about very quickly about your instructor voice. All right. A cue is basically to give a prompt. So AFA talks about different types of learners. We have the visual, the auditory, and then we have the kinesthetic. So those are people who need to see, to hear, and to do it. So people are a variety of all of those. Now, we also have nonverbal cueing. What about using your fingers, your arms, your head, your feet to indicate direction? But also we can use things like our face and our shoulders and our chest and our elbows to kind of indicate direction as well as emotions. So I kind of think of it as a GPS, right? So if you have a GPS, you sometimes use nonverbal and sometimes you use verbal. So you sometimes have directions that are shown to you, and then sometimes you have them telling you, turn right here. But if you're coming to a direction, it's sometimes easier just to tell people which direction to go. So I think of it kind of like skiing. It's very easy to start to do, and it is hard to master. So it is great for people who are what? Yes, visual learners. So you want to indicate direction, countdown of numbers and repetitions. It's great for large crowds where you have no mic and you want to really amp people up. And it's also great for learning to cue when you are starting to cue. Now, verbal cueing. We talk about verbal cueing for what type of learners? Auditory learners, right? So when I was starting, I was terrified of the mic because of stories that my friends had told me. And also I was self-conscious of talking in front of people, all these people. So if you were like me, start small, give yourself time to learn the equipment, just put on the equipment, even if it's not on, and get used to the equipment. And then you can also build on from there and just cue a little bit at a time, maybe just counting down the numbers or small things here and there, and then build up. Now, the different types of verbal cueing that we have are external type of cues. So movements that go to the outcome, kind of spatial, pull the bar up to your chest. Sometimes they are necessary for heavier loads and when we have to increase the intensity of our movements. Sometimes they are movement cues to tell you the action that's going to be performed. So sometimes you can't verbally cue, non-verbally cue, you have to verbally cue. Internal cueing is kind of directed at what's going on inside your body. So squeeze your belly button, right? It helps feel the exercise in the right place so that people are getting their anatomical cues. Both of those type of cues, the external and internal cues, are really essential for safety, for technique, and alignment for your kinetic chain. So the last one that I wanted to talk about today is imagery cueing. So you want to paint people a picture to help your participants maybe laugh or remember, relate to what you're trying to get them to do. And that is always really key to connecting to your students and your participants. Now, let's talk about coaching. NASM, Behavioral Change Specialization, has a COACH acronym. It is somebody who is caring, open-ended, affirming of the client, somebody where you are concentrated on the client, and sometimes where you are helping the client. So we want to think about those and how we can coach in addition to just cue. When we think about coaches, we usually think about sports, right? We think about a soccer or athletic coach. What does that look like in a class? Now, there is a reason that we are called instructors and not participants. We don't have to do every single rep because our goal for that class is not to get in our exercise. Our goal is to be the best instructor that we can be, right, for that hour. So we really need to demonstrate an area of observing and helping people succeed. So that is what I think of as coaching. So coaches, they don't play in the game. They're on the sidelines. They're encouraging people on. They are telling people how to do things right. So in a group setting, it's being physically at the same level of the student. So sometimes if you're in a large area, you can't do that, right? Obviously. And also, if you are a personal trainer, that means sometimes walking around your client 360 degrees to see them from all different angles to make sure they have a good posture, they're being safe and having good posture. Additionally, it's going to sound very, very different and look very different for classes like yoga versus boot camp versus Zumba. So the words that you would use to coach people are also going to be something that's going to be slightly different. So think about what voice you would use. Now, a coach is somebody who trains you, breaks down the movement into parts so that people can do it themselves and succeed, right? Ultimately, we want people to succeed in our class so that they are successful and they will come back. So let's give them motivation, connect with them on a personal level, and keep them safe. So there are some considerations of when to cue and when to coach. So it depends on proximity and height to your participants. Are you on a stage? Are you performing or training? Sometimes you are performing. Are you having a different type of format or target audience? Are you talking to seniors or are you talking to millennials? Now, how much knowledge do you know and how much can you impart? So those are all different considerations. And then once you get going, figuring out when to use one versus the other. Now, what are their similarities? Coaching and cueing both should be about the most key thing, which is creating connections. Great instructors know how to connect, and they connect through eye contact. So you don't want to connect and stare at people longer than 10 seconds. It's a little creepy. You want to also smile a lot, more than you think that you need to smile. It's kind of crazy, but it's really true. You want to be empathetic. Put yourself in their shoes and be kind. You don't know what kind of day they have or what their situation is at home. So it is really important that they come to your class and have a very good time. Sometimes it's also being aware of your own emotions and being sensitive to the emotions of others. So they are your students. There is a little barrier. They don't need to know everything that that's going on in your life. Now, the other thing we want to do is make sure that it's appropriate. Is it appropriate to the movement, the audience, and the location? Do you have 4 people or 40 people? Do you have a mic? So all of these things are considerations, but they should be appropriate. Timed correctly. This is very key. So if you don't know how to do 2 count cueing, go to an AFA workshop. This is one thing I spent an hour on for people to learn how to 2 count cue. So it's usually on the, if a movement has 8 beats, on the 7 and the 8 prior to the 1 and the 2. Because if you cue them on the 1, it's already too late. The other thing we can do is make it tapered, V-shaped. So we want to taper the frequency as the participant progresses in your class. So you're going to repeat less the more that you do it until you can take it down to 1 word or motion. So we'll see about some of that during the 8 tips, okay? We want to be able to cue to the solution and not the problem. This is really, really important that we cue positively. All right, so let's have a quick example. Everybody march in place. March your feet in place. No, you're doing it wrong. Now, where did your head go? Did you just pull away from me, think about what you were doing wrong, lose track of our session, right? This is something that's very, very typical. So let's start this again. Right foot, left foot, right foot, left foot, right, right, right. Yes. Great marching. Now stop. Did we get back to the class? Did I pull you back in with me? Did everyone out there end up on the right foot? So this is what we're talking about. Let's cue to the solution. All right. Now, the next step is coaching cues. AFA does this great show, tell, and do cueing, which affects all 3 different kinds of learners, right? The next step is informational, educational cues, like answer your clients why they need to do what you're making them do. So a lot of times seniors think of deadlifts and squats as unnecessary. It's for young people. I don't need to lift 500 pounds of weights. But if you tell them it's going to help you get off the potty so that you don't have to go to assisted living, guess what? They are going to be motivated. So give them the reason why they should do it. Are they picking up their kids? Are they picking up their cats? Are they putting away their groceries? Are they putting away their dishes? Tell them why they need to do it. The other thing we need to do is compensatory sometimes, is to, if they're still not getting things right, to tell them to use a prop. So basically say, push to my hand and put your hand in the right spot. Or use some sort of equipment such as a band or dowel, weights, balls. And at home, now that we are home, you can use things like broomsticks, cabinets, chairs. So be creative and figure out how you can help your clients. Finally, before we go to the 8 coaching cues, I want to talk very briefly about your kinetic chain. You need to know your kinetic chain. And we're going to go over a bunch of them in our cues, but basically it is the 5 checkpoints. It is your cervical spine, your shoulders, your core, your knees, and your feet. Okay, finally, my top 8 coaching cues. Are you guys excited? I'm aiming for these cues that are unexpected and memorable to help optimize alignment and prevent common problems that we see in class. So we want to do things such as optimize outcomes, create structural integrity and safety, force production, how much you're able to lift and load, stability, balance, create neuromuscular efficiency, and then some virtual type of cues to remember to, how to people to do things while they're over the internet. One thing I do want to remind you is not to over-cue. So talking too much can create paralysis by over-analysis. People who are very new to exercise don't like too many cues while they're exercising. However, they also do want to know that you're there and paying attention to them, to their form, to their safety and alignment. So don't expect participant perfection. They are not pros at this. That's why you're there. Expect progress. Even if it's not perfect, if it's improved, praise them for what they did right, the specific things, and then cue the next error that you see. But positively, right? Yes. So these are these coaching cues that I'm hoping to give you are jumping points for ideas. They're there to help you rethink your cueing and give you ideas to use to keep your participants safe and engaged in your class. There's a quiz question with every single coaching cue, so play along on your phone. We can probably do an hour on each, but here we go. Actually, before we do that, I have to tell you, under no circumstances is it appropriate for us to diagnose health conditions or prescribe treatments for individuals. So we are not doctors. We are not paid like doctors. We don't have doctor's insurance. And even if you are a doctor, they're not visiting you in your office as a doctor. So just, you can suggest and say, this has worked for someone I know, or this has worked for me, but don't say you should do this or you have this, okay? The other thing is always before you are in class, it's very important to cue seniors, if you're dealing with a lot of seniors, which I am in Florida, to always breathe and drink water. So at least 3 times during your 1-hour class, you want to make sure you're cueing that. Okay, let's go on to coaching cue number 1. How often do you see this? How would you cue to correct this? So the big problem is that her hips are sagging, right? So a lot of us would say things like hollow or engage your core to tell them to pull up their abs. Now, somebody who's new to exercise might not understand what that means. So instead, maybe what we can do is tell them to put an ice cube to their belly button. Now, when I told you that, what did you do? You drew in your belly button, right? So a lot of people aren't aware of the amount of bracing that's needed for an activity. So if you're going to do, it's going to be based on your load, right? So if it's a squat versus a plank versus sitting, these type of cues are going to help them engage their anterior core muscles versus sucking it in and hollowing and holding their breath, which can be detrimental to them. So similar to when we laugh or cough, use a hard tisk of breath through your teeth to exhale about 1/3 of your breath. Now, people who are martial artists know that a lot of martial arts forms use the word kia, and they do that to tighten and brace their core. So we need to retrain ourselves to brace on the exhale, which is opposite from what our learned behavior is to feel strongest with a large belly full of air. Now, when we brace on an inhale with a full belly of air, that can cause pelvic floor issues, especially for women, belly distension, and storing that fat under your belly, which Beyonce calls fupa. So, that might not be something that you want to encourage your clients to do. Bracing on a partial exhale is like creating an internal weightlifting belt, and that is what we do want to do. So Paul Chek, who's a very famous person, he talked about at one of these fitness conferences that I went to about exhaling on the ab expansion and inhaling on the ab expansion and exhaling on the contraction. So if you take a deep breath with me, big inhale, what do you want to do? You want to expand. And when you exhale, what do you want to do? You want to contract. So if you can make your movements fit with that, you are really doing great. So some of these cues that we can give in addition to the belly button, to the ice cube to the belly button, is to protect, to brace for a punch. That's one of the things that we can do. Now we can tell the people why they need to create strength in their core, and it is because to protect their lower back, to create stability. The core is the basis of all of our movement. If you're in a plank, sometimes I tell people there's a sharp needle underneath your belly button, and all of a sudden they draw it in because they need to brace it more than if they are just sitting and putting an ice cube to their belly button. The other thing about bracing your core is sometimes you also need to tighten your butt cheeks. So a lot of times I'll say, there's a winning lotto ticket in your butt cheeks, squeeze it tight, and then also tighten your core. Now, virtually, sometimes I tell people to open their hands and then create a fist so that they know to tighten their core. You can do things like hover all over the small of your back to tell people, push to my hand, push your belly button to my hand. I have a link for a great article, and it's on an ASM, and it is by Rick Ritchie, who is awesome. And it has a link to a great video with Wendy Batts and Marty Miller, who are also awesome, about core progressions. And it is also available in the handouts. Now, the question that, if you're doing the Slido, is what is the core's technical term? And it is the lumbopelvic hip complex. All right, coaching cue number 2. Oops. Oh, I just hit the wrong button. Sorry. That is the proper posture. Okay, coaching cue number 2. How often do we see this with this arched back, right? Now, instead of keeping a neutral spine, new participants might not understand what that means. So I want to tell our participants to keep a long and strong spine. Sometimes people don't know how to find their neutral spine, which gets us to our Beyonce and Urkel. Okay, so if you guys are looking at your hips, what does Beyonce do? Stick out the butt cheeks, right? And then what does Urkel do? Tuck in the hips, right? So do a Beyonce, do an Urkel, and then release. And that is your neutral spine. The other thing that we can do is teacup hips. A lot of people say that you have teacups in your hips, and you don't want to spill the tea by tilting it too far forward or too far back. And that's exactly the same analogy, but it's just a little harder to visualize the teacup. But you never know. Some people learn one way versus the other way. Now, the reason that we have a long and strong spine is to protect your spine and to create hip mobility and to activate your core. So for example, let's kind of hunch forward, arch your back, and try to engage your core and arch your back at the same time. You can't, right? So a lot of people who are overweight, they have a big belly, or pregnant people, they have a hard time protecting their lower back because it is extended, and their spine is pinching all of individual vertebrae. So that is something that people have to be careful of. So how do we cue them to fix that, right? So in addition to the long and strong spine, we're talking about creating spaces between your shoulders and your hips and increasing that space, right? Now, if you are arched, can you go side to side? No, but if you tense your stomach, squeeze your butt cheeks, and lift up and create more space, then you can have more mobility to go side to side, to have more your lateral movements. Now, we can also cue things like externally lift your chest to get taller, right? We can talk about squeezing your butt cheeks and your belly buttons like we did in cue number 1. And also sometimes visually, if you're doing kind of virtual classes, you can tell them, push your hips towards me, or the floor or the front of the room, whatever it is that you need to cue them. So the question on Slido is, what common postural distortion is this? Do you guys know? Anybody who's studying for their CPTs or CES should know this. And it is, right, lower cross syndrome. This will help you protect your calves, your hips, flexors, your lats. Now, I didn't say straight spine, I said natural curves. So we have long and strong spine. The common injury patterns to this postural distortion is having hamstring strains, anterior knee and lower back pain, because you have weak hip flexors and weak glutes, and I'm sorry, tight hip flexors, tight lower back, and weak glutes and weak abs. Okay, coaching cue number 3. When do we see this? People who sit like this, right? Or people who stand like this. We see this a lot in older people. The scary thing is that we're also seeing this a lot in teenagers because everybody has technology. So we have this kind of forward movement where everybody's looking down on their phone and their back is arched. So instead of saying, don't round your back because we have to cue positively, we should talk about putting your shoulders away from your ears. So we want to tell people, oops, I did this backwards, sorry. So we want to tell people to protect their spine and their back and take bigger breaths. So for example, hunch over, take a breath. Good. Now put your shoulders around and back and take a breath. You could take a deeper breath when your shoulders are raised. So if you are curved forward, people can't get enough oxygen. So verbally, nonverbal imagery is you can just round your shoulders and show people how to tuck their shoulders into their back pockets. I sometimes tell people, show that diamond necklace, right? So whatever it is that you can get them to do to remember. The other thing that you can do is tell people they forgot their deodorant and squeeze their armpits closed. And if we're in Florida, I sometimes say squeeze oranges in those armpits, and then they squeeze them closed. And that brings your chest up too. We are trying to get them to wrap their shoulder blades around their spine. So that's an external cue, right? And lift their rib cage. But don't forget that we also need to do the ice cube, engage their belly button, so that we're not doing the postural distortion for cue number 2, which is arching the back, right? Great, good job. Now, the common compensatory cue for people who often are doing personal training is to tap the shoulders to tell people to lower their shoulders, right? Now, when you do that, sometimes it forces people to come up to your hand. So instead of getting them to lower and then pushing, put your hands on their lower back and tell them to contract their lower and mid traps and middle traps and tell them to squeeze. Okay. Now, a way that we can do this virtually is I like to get people to up and then around. And if you do that movement, your shoulders are around and back and away from your ears. So that is a nice cue to be able to do for people if you're coaching them virtually, so that you can't actually position them. Now, the question for this coaching cue is, what postural distortion does this address? And it is upper cross syndrome. Yes. So upper cross syndrome gives you that weak neck, flexors, your rhomboids, your lower traps. You have tight upper pecs and traps, and your SCM is tight. So common injuries are rotator cuff impingements, shoulder instability, bicep tendinitis, and headaches. So that's a very treatment that we can always cue our participants on and work with them so that they can improve their quality of life. Okay, next. This is kind of along with the lines of the first one. So we see this kind of motion, which is, again, yes, upper cross syndrome, right? So what we want to do is cue people to line their head with the back, in line with their back. Keep their head in line with their back. So the way to do that is to double chin yourself. Give yourself a double chin, or face palm, or say you ran into a brick wall. So this, we are trying to protect our cervical spine and create shoulder safety so that we can have proper alignment. You see the man in the blue, his gaze is up. We want to make sure that people are gazing straight and keeping their head in line with their body. So you can do things like have a broomstick and make sure that they're bringing their head down behind their back. Or you can have them do things like go up against the wall and see if you can bring your head to the wall or a corner. So if you get the corner of two walls, right, you can line your heels up to the bottom, your butt cheeks, your back, and your head. And your hand should not be able to fit behind the small of your back. All right. Let's talk about this one. We see this a lot in the gym. There's always somebody in every single class that I give that has this. And for us to talk about knees, we have to address proper foot and ankle mechanics. So knees are a dummy joint. They go wherever your hips and your feet and your ankles directed to go. So your hips are a hinge, right? So they don't have motion side to side. They only go forward and back. So without proper foot, ankle, even toe activation, sometimes it's impossible to perform any lower body exercises correctly. So those are things that include like squats, lunges, hinges, single leg exercises, overhead presses, bench presses, any exercise that require firm lower body foundation. Now, when we have knee issues like knock knees or flat feet, these might be indication and lead to a spiral of injuries, ACL, bursitis, lower back pain, plantar fasciitis. So we want to cue people to have their knees in line with your feet versus saying, don't let your knees collapse. So people don't understand, what does that mean, knees collapsing, right? And then also negative, right? So we want to cue to the solution. Keep your knees in line with your feet. Now, if you talk about kinetic chain, you know that we try to keep it over our second and third toes, knees in the same direction as the second and third toes. All right, so we want to make sure we are going to tell people to protect their knees and ankles and hips. We can say things like putting your thumbs above your knees and then rotating them straight. So if you can see them, right? So these are okay. You can say that there is laser shooting out of your knees. The other thing you can tell them is to nail the outside of your heels to the floor, and this will bring their knees out. The other thing that I like to tell people is railroad tracks. Make sure that their knees and their feet are on railroad tracks and not tight ropes so that they're not going to be bent in. Some sort of compensatory cue would be to hold your hand on the outside of their knees or use a band and tell them to push to the outside. Now, for the question for Slido, what posture malfunction is this? And it is knee valgus or pronation distortion syndrome. So pronation distortion syndrome, there you go, has a common injury patterns of plantar fasciitis, shin splints, anterior knee pain, and low back pain. All right. Now, on to number 5, coaching cues. We are seeing this a lot, but it's a little hard to see. I see this a lot of times with seniors. And this is something that if you're an ASM CPT, we talk about this all the time, the overhead squat analysis. So when we want to cue this, sometimes we want to cue them to sit down in an invisible chair instead of telling them to sit back, because sitting back will cause people to drop their chest. This could indicate people can do this because they have weak glutes and weak upper backs, like their traps, their ROMs, their delts. Those are hard to work out normally and also in a group exercise class. They might also have very tight hip flexors or calves. So you can see sometimes we want them to be in this nice parallel shape, right? But sometimes you can see if people can put their heels on a weight or a little plank and they can then squat properly, it's their calves. Their calves are too tight. So sometimes we have to keep an eye also on people's body types. So if somebody is naturally really short torsoed and very long-legged, they might have a really hard time doing this. And also, if somebody has short legs and a longer torso, they really have to make sure that they are not leaning excessively forward. So key to this is feet. Feet position, like we talked about in number 4, can really cause this to not happen properly. So we want to tell people to support and strengthen their backside, protect their lower back, their hamstrings, be able to increase their load, and to maybe get off the potty. Some images that we can tell them is you're watching the season finale, sit down during the season finale, to hinge forward and brush your teeth and look at yourself in the mirror. Sometimes the other thing we can do is tell them, let's pretend that this is our big toe and this is our pinky toe, to make sure that they can feel their pinky toe, their big toe, and their heel on the floor, so that have that triangle to strengthen that feet position. We also want to make sure that they have that long, strong spine and that they're looking forward. So you can also do this with a broomstick to their back to make sure that they are nice and straight. And one of the cues that we can talk about is kind of images that we can give them is that there is a bow and arrow. So the string is where your hips are, and your head is and your feet are the tips of the bow. So the more force that you can bring your hips back straight, the more force that you can then put into your movement. The other thing is sometimes when they're sitting down, you need to tell them, okay, you're going to feel it in your hamstrings, right? So tell them where they're supposed to feel it and tell them where they're supposed to be. All right. So sometimes we see this for the lunges, right? Where people are, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. There was a question for cue number 5, right? So what is the technical term for a group of muscles on the back of your body? And it is the posterior chain. So the CES cert has a great section on the posterior chain. Strengthening the posterior chain in your upper back, it will help with this pattern distortion and help stretch your hips and hip flexors and your calves. So Fabio Camona has a great article about the squatting rules, breaking down the science of the squat. The other thing we want to talk about is coaching cue number 6, which brings me to this. Fabio also talks about this, the squats, because the people who lean forward are making their knees go into a point, right? So when you have the same amount of force, so if a force is straight, right, versus when the force is pinpointed, it's much different. So it's like poking somebody with your finger versus poking somebody with a needle. The amount of force that is concentrated is happening more when your knee goes past your toes. So researchers also noticed that it made your lumbar spine more susceptible to injury. So if you lean more forward at your knee, it tends to cause you to lean more forward at your hips, which then causes you to arch your back, like number 2, right? So it creates more force in between the individual vertebrae of the spine, like your L5 to your S1 or your L5 to your L4. And during the upward phase, when you're coming up, there's more spinal extension that's needed. And so you tend to arch your back. However, we don't always try to keep our knees past or behind our toes. Sometimes if you want to do a deeper squat, you need wider feet, and you can then lunge deeper safely. Or sometimes you need to do like this lady in the red, which is get more glute involvement and hip extension when you stretch. And to do that, you need to go and put your knees past your toes. So we want to tell people to be elevators when they're lunging, to go straight up and down and not lean forward. All right. Coaching cue number 7. Oh, I did this again. Question: which quad muscles moves both the knee and the hip? And the question is answered by, all right, so the one quad muscle that sounds different from the other one, the rectus femoris, which is one of the quad muscles and one of your hip flexors. So it can be commonly injured with a hip flexor strain, and it is a 2-joint muscle, aka biarticular, and the opposing muscle, as a bonus question, is also biarticular, is what? Yes, the hamstrings. Good. All right. Good job, you guys. All right, coaching cue number 7. I'm sure you are excited to learn about lemurs. We talk about people as they age, they develop cycles of muscle imbalances and postural dysfunctions, such as hunching forward with age, or constantly using their cell phone, putting a heavy bag on one shoulder, favoring a dominant arm or leg, maybe a layout of your house where your spice jar is always on one side and you always are reaching. Maybe it is from the way that you sleep, that you stretch one leg more than the other leg. Maybe you are a driver, you have to drive long distance every day, so you're constantly pushing on the gas pedal or the brake pedal with your right foot. Repetitive actions such as sports, any people who play lots of sports. So it could be also things like medical reasons that are causing you to have pain, leg discrepancy, leg length discrepancy. So it is a cycle that you have muscle imbalances, causes postural dysfunctions, which causes muscle imbalances. So it just goes around and around. We as fitness instructors want to make sure that we are correcting as many of these as we can. And when we see them, to try to let people know that they need to straighten up, right? So to do that, I tell people to have headlights in their eyes, their shoulders, their hips, their knees, and their feet. So if your headlights are straight, then you're doing good. This is why I say people need to be lemurs and not chameleons. So you want to make sure they're straight and not all sorts of crazy. This will help them create symmetrical weight balance, help your posture, your safety, and your alignment. So this is pretty key. Now, along with this, you want to make sure you know your kinetic chain, right? Kinetic chain. All right. Now, how do we check what view of our body do we check for headlights and alignment primarily as instructors? It is our anterior or front view. The lateral or side views and posterior or back views are also helpful, but a lot of times as instructors, we really get to see them face on, and it is very important for us to make sure that they are in alignment. Okay. This is a quick, so a lot of times we're saying, okay, how do we gain balance and muscle activation if they're off balance, right? Okay, so let's do this exercise. Do a lateral arm lift, not higher than your shoulders. Good. Now you just save your arms. They're just waving over there. That's great. You feel it in your shoulders, right? Great. Now push on one side. You feel it on one shoulder. Push on both sides. Now what happens? When you are pushing in opposite directions, you come to a center and strength. So that's when you fire up all your muscles and people can really, really activate and work their muscles. So you want to think about all the oppositions, your head to the ceiling, your feet through your floor. When you're lifting a weight, pretend it's a 100-pound weight. So it's not just the up, but it's also the down. We want to talk about defying gravity, push through the energy field, push through the mud with your feet if you're trying to get them to really push down, or be a mime in the box, whatever it is that you can get to them so that they can then push through the opposites. So it's all about head, shoulders, hips. So trying to get everything spread apart. Great job. Final coaching cue is the wrists. So I have there we go. Now, wrist pain can happen during a workout, and it's most likely due to improper wrist positioning or overloading your weak structures, which is a wrist, and overuse. So sometimes wrists and forearms might be taking more abuse during a workout because the shoulder joint lacks mobility. So the forearm muscles overcompensate. Another common thing is that the tendons of the wrist can be hot, inflamed, and painfully swollen and degenerate over time. So trying to work out through the pain when you have joint pain can turn a simple condition like tendonitis into something really serious and chronic. So what we want to do is encourage people to have a ruler taped to their wrist. So you have a ruler taped to your fist and to your forearm, and your wrists and forearms are nice and straight. Good. The other thing you can say is knuckles up to the sky, right? What we do want to show people is that if you have an imbalance, if your wrist is bent, can you put a lot of force on it? You'll feel it on one side versus the other side, versus if it's perfectly balanced. So we want to have nice straight wrists. This is very useful if you have boxing or weightlifting. All right. Signs of carpal tunnel syndrome, which is a very common wrist injury, is decreased range of motions, 60 seconds of the Phalanx test if you're feeling any sort of burning, numbness, tingling, or pain in your forearms and fingers, but not your pinky. Those might be signs to go talk to your doctor. All right, at the end of the class, how did we make them feel? Did you make them feel confident, successful, or confused and discouraged? Did you sound authoritative or knowledgeable? Or heaven forbid, they are not coming back to your class because they sustained an injury in your class. So we want to make sure that we keep our cues for safety to make sure that they always come back, right? If we can make our cues relevant or funny, unexpected, relatable, those are the ones that they remember. Keep your cues short. Take out all the extra words like put your, let's try, now, go. All of those words can go out. If you can use that word like you're talking to your dog, you don't want to say, okay, Kona, my dog's name, let's go to the park right now. You're just going to say Kona Park, and he's going to, oh, there he goes with his head. Sorry, Kona. So then we want to make sure that it's simple, short, and clear, concise, specific. Arm, what arm? That it's positive. And overall, we want to make sure that it is going to be correct. You don't want to cue them improperly. Now, your kinetic chain checkpoints, very, very crucial. It is, I keep coming back to us because this is key to what we need to know. It is a chain. So one thing that affects one thing, your shoulders are going to affect something else, like your hips and your knees. So if you're talking about your NASM, we have the regional interdependence model, your AFL GFI workshops. Make sure you go and know what you're talking about. Okay. Instructor voice, very, very quickly. It is the public face of our actions and passion. So our voices can make people feel welcome, guide our participants, prevent them from making mistakes. We can encourage them, we can discourage them, embrace them, push them away. We can be motivational. We can be more drill sergeant for boot camp or Tabata. We can be creating a party when we're doing Zumba. So we can have different personalities for each type of class. And that is okay and also good. However, we want to make sure that our voices are authentic. So it is something that you would say for yourself. Maybe in different situations, you would say different things, right? But if it's not something that you would say yourself and you wouldn't say it naturally, then maybe that's not something that you would try to think of some different way of saying it. You want to be the date or interview version of yourself. So we want to create connections with our participants. It's kind of like networking, right? So we want to be authentic, receptive, consistent, adaptable, charismatic, patient. We're going to be a coaching, caring cheerleader for our people. All right. Now, how do we find our voice? We want to make sure, go on. Why is it not working? I'm pushing. Aha. What makes you, you? So this is very different for every single one of us. I know of people who do motivational cycle at 6:30 in the morning. I know people, yoga instructors who talk about politics. It could be all sorts of things. What makes you, you will create your tribe and create your participants' view of who you are. So look at yourself. What do you love? What are you passionate about? Look at your social media. What makes you unique? What change would you like to see in the world? And for me, it came about when I taught my first GFI workshop. I think that, you know, it could be any of those situations. As long as we take steps to keep learning, opening ourselves up to opportunities, and always keep learning, that is how we can grow as people and grow as instructors. Look at your social media. What does it say about you? I just want to encourage you that you are taking this professional, you are a fitness pro, you're taking this seriously because you're attending things like Optima. And that is amazing and crucial. You have to keep filling your cup. You can get burned out as an instructor. Constantly learn and grow. So in recap, I just want to let you guys know that we are talking about, oops, the coaching cues. Why is this not working? Sorry. Know the difference between cueing versus coaching, when to do one or versus the other, what cues resonate with you. Are we going to talk about the core? Are we talking about your hips? Are we talking about your spine? Are we talking about your head position, squatting, lunging, how to do them safer? Do you have any cues that you love? Let me know. Facebook or Instagram me. Your instructor voice takes trial and error and a lot of practice. Don't be discouraged. Just keep going. I want to thank you so very much for spending an hour with me. It's if there's questions about AFA, there's contacts on the screen. If you have questions about NASM, go to nasm.org or the number on the screen. And then if you have any sort of questions about the program, please let me know. I'd love to get your feedback and to stay in touch. You can find me on Facebook or Instagram. You can find me at shalanefit.com. I have a free new fitness podcast that I'm just started. So please give me your feedback. And I just want to let you know that be the change that you really would want to see. If you set that goal in your mind and you speak it from the heart, it will happen. I want to encourage you to say that you are an important force in this world. And together we can affect a tidal wave of change, whether it's just one person at a time or a whole group of people at a time. Your thoughts create words and your words create actions. So don't be discouraged. And as NASM says, change lives, change the world. Thank you so very, very much.